During the reading of my father's will, the atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating. Sitting across from me, my cousin Thomas wore a triumphant expression. His impeccable suit, his luxurious watch. Everything suggested he was swimming in wealth, and it worried me. When the lawyer, Mr. Lemoyne, began the reading, Thomas couldn't help but burst out laughing. "I've already taken the money and spent it all, so good luck," he said arrogantly. A subtle smile passed over the lawyer's lips as he slid a file across the table. "In fact, you might want to read this first." Thomas's confidence wavered. His smile faded as he skimmed the first page. His hands, once steady, started trembling slightly. "What?" he stammered. Mr. Lemoyne adjusted his glasses. "What you're holding in your hands is proof that your uncle wasn't fooled. He had foreseen your little scheme, and he took precautions." A heavy silence settled in. I savored the moment as Thomas realized he hadn't won. He had trapped himself. The lawyer, a man with graying temples and a piercing gaze, slowly unfolded a thick document. With a serious expression, he began reading in a calm voice. With each word, Julian's smile widened. Then, unexpectedly, he burst out laughing. "I've already taken the money and spent it all, so good luck," he said, his arrogance filling the room. His laughter echoed for a moment before dying down in a heavy silence. Mr. Delcourt, unflappable, gave a slight smile before sliding a file toward him. "In fact, you might want to read this first," he said. Julian raised an eyebrow, his confidence slightly faltering. He grabbed the papers in a brusque motion and skimmed the first lines. His complexion immediately changed. "This is impossible," he mumbled. I leaned forward to observe his expression, a mix of confusion and panic. His gaze flew to the lawyer, who crossed his arms with measured patience. "My father was a man of foresight," I said slowly. He knew who he was dealing with. Julian straightened up, tense. "This is a mistake." "Not at all," the lawyer responded calmly. "Your uncle placed his entire fortune under condition. And, Julian, it seems your little maneuver has already ruined everything." A heavy silence fell over the room. For the first time, my cousin had nothing to say. Mayor Grant nodded and opened the file in front of her. She adjusted her glasses, her gaze scanning the documents with surgical precision. "Very well. Let's begin." She first read a few formalities, words that seemed meaningless to me, before reaching the actual provisions of the will. Julian leaned casually against his chair, a barely concealed smile on his lips. "To my nephew Julian Morel." He straightened slightly, impatience shining in his eyes. "I bequeath the symbolic sum of €1. The room seemed to freeze. Julian blinked, his expression frozen in an uncertain grimace. "What?" he exclaimed. Mayor Grant didn't flinch. "The entire estate of Mr. Morel has been transferred to a charitable foundation, in accordance with his last wishes." Julian suddenly stood up, pushing his chair back with a crash. "This is a joke." "I'm afraid not," the lawyer replied with unshakable calm. For the first time, my cousin seemed to lose his composure. A heavy silence fell over the room. My heart pounded in my chest as Julian's mocking and triumphant laughter still echoed. The lawyer, impassive, gently closed the file before pulling out another, thicker one, which she slid across the table toward my cousin. "In fact, Julian, I suggest you read this before you get too excited," she said in a neutral tone. My cousin's smile faltered. With a brusque motion, he grabbed the file and turned the first page. His expression changed instantly. His complexion drained of color as his eyes scanned the lines of the document. "This is impossible," he murmured. I leaned slightly forward, trying to see what could have shaken him so much. The lawyer spared me the effort. Mr. Morel anticipated this possibility. He commissioned an investigation into the use of the funds released before his death. This file contains evidence that you forged his signature to obtain this money. Julian looked up at her, horrified. "You're lying." "No," she replied, pointing to another sheet. "This is an official complaint filed before his death. A legal procedure is underway." A chilling silence enveloped us. My cousin had just realized that his triumph had been nothing but an illusion, and that my father's shadow still hung over him, even after his death. Julian flipped through the file with growing nervousness. His fingers trembled slightly as his gaze scanned the pages filled with official documents, bank statements, and signed correspondences. "This is a joke," he whispered, his eyes wide. Maya Grant folded her hands on the table and continued, unfazed. "No, Mr. Julian. My client, the late Mr. Morel, knew perfectly well your nature and your intentions. He anticipated your attempt at embezzlement and took precautions." Julian raised his head, furious. "Precautions?" "Yes," confirmed Maya Grant. "That money you thought you had stolen? It was traceable. Every transaction, every withdrawal was monitored. And as you can see, your signature on the transfer documents does not match Mr. Morel's." Julian's face paled even further. "What does this mean?" "It means that not only have you already spent it all, but you will have to answer for your actions in court." A heavy silence fell over the room. For the first time, my cousin had nothing to say. Julian swallowed hard. His insolent confidence had evaporated, replaced by visible panic. His eyes darted over every line, as if hoping to find an escape. "This is a lie," he finally shouted, throwing the file onto the table. Maya Grant raised an eyebrow before calmly tapping the file with her fingertips. "All is authentic, verified, and legally recorded. Your uncle called on experts to ensure every detail was airtight." I felt anger rising within me. My father had always been a wise man, but I never would have imagined that he would go so far as to set such an elaborate trap. "You made Julian believe he had access to the money," I said slowly. "Exactly," confirmed me Grant. "The funds he spent came from a monitored account. In reality, he never touched a cent of the actual inheritance." Julian suddenly stood up, knocking his chair over. "You can't do this to me." "It's not me," the lawyer replied with a smile. "It's your uncle." The atmosphere was icy. For the first time, Julian understood that he had played a game he couldn't win. Julian paled. His arrogance had evaporated in an instant. He was still flipping through the documents, hoping to find a loophole, some way out, but his agitation betrayed his panic. "This isn't possible. You're lying." Me Grant remained impassive. "Everything was done by the book. Your uncle knew your impatience and your greed. He wanted to see if you would give in to temptation. You did. And you lost everything." Julian shot me a furious glance, as if I were responsible for his misfortune. "And him. He gets everything." Me Grant turned to me with a slight smile. "Not exactly. Your father had a final wish. The inheritance didn't go to the one who claimed possession, but to the one who was worthy of it. I frowned. What does that mean? The lawyer opened another file and handed it to me. My heart raced as I discovered its contents. It wasn't just money, but a responsibility much greater than I had imagined. Oh, but we can, Grant cut in with unshakable calm. Julian grabbed the papers as though crumpling them would change their content. His eyes scanned the lines frantically, but he found no escape. These funds were transferred to a temporary account, Grant continued. They weren't actually yours. My client, your uncle, added an extra clause. If a premature withdrawal occurred, any investment or purchase would be considered a debt owed to the estate. Julian paled. A debt. Exactly, confirmed the lawyer. You have to repay it all. Every cent. Julian burst into laughter, a nervous, broken laugh. You must be joking. I've already spent it all. Grant shrugged. That's not my problem. However, the justice system will take a keen interest in it. Silence fell heavily in the room. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. His confidence had disappeared. As for me, I felt the weight of this revelation. My father had orchestrated this lesson masterfully. But what did he have in store for me? Julian put his head in his hands, breathing heavily. He looked around the room like a hunted animal searching for an escape. But there was none. You can't do this to me, he stammered. Grant remained stone-faced. Oh, we're not doing anything, Julian. You dug your own grave. Julian suddenly stood up, knocking over his chair. His face was red with rage and panic mixed. This is a scam. A petty revenge. You have no right. The lawyer smoothed his suit sleeves, unflappable. You can scream all you want, but the facts are clear. Your uncle knew your nature. He left a perfectly legal trap that you rushed into. Julian trembled. I have friends, contacts. I'll find a way to turn this around. I stood up as well, crossing my arms. Then hurry up, because in the meantime, justice will deal with you. He shot me a murderous glance before looking away. He knew he was finished. No more wealth, no more power, no more easy life. Just debts and trouble. Grant piled the documents in front of him. On that note, gentlemen, I believe we're done. Julian stumbled out of the room, his world collapsing around him. I remained seated, thinking about my father. A faint smile escaped me. He had known how to protect his inheritance and his memory.